leaking top insider stock trades every day until they stop us. Remember, 90% of insider trades are totally useless. We are only trying to find those abnormal insider trades that can help us outperform. So what is an abnormal trade that we're looking for? Well, we're looking for a trade that is unscheduled, so not for tax sales, dividend reinvestments, employee stock purchase plans, etc. An abnormal one in some way, whether that be unusual timing, flipping from buys to sells, etc. A history of success from the insider is a huge signal. If they buy the stock before it goes up or sell before it goes down, they have a history of doing that successfully. Huge signal there. The size and quantity of the trade, if we have multiple insiders trading the stock or if they're abnormally large. And then the price action can be interesting as well if they're selling the rip or buying the dip. Let's take a look at the insider purchases here. We can see the number of buys has been pretty flat over the last week or so, but it is quite a bit lower than it was back in the beginning of August. The sales, we had just a relatively low day overall in terms of number of insider trades overall, but still obviously below the median here in terms of the percent of insider trades that were buys. Crept up a little bit from last week, but still well below the median of where about 1 in every 5 trades are normally a buy. We're below that right now. If we look back over the quarter, and I mean the month, we're still pretty early in the month here, but you can see we're trending very, very low, especially for the month of September. This is very, very low, as September is not really an earnings month. So normally you'll start to see insider purchases specifically come way down. Insider trades overall come way down around earnings, but especially insider buys because it's a blackout period, so they can't make discretionary purchases, but they can continue their 10b5-1 plans if they already have those set up. So very, very low for the month of September. In the quarter, we're probably going to come in at a relatively low quarter as well, once September wraps up at about 0.2 versus about 1 in every, on a quarterly basis, about 1 in every 4 trades are normally a purchase. We're going to be more in that 1 in every 5. So pretty much kind of across the board, we're looking a little more bearish than normal in terms of insider sentiment, which not really surprising given kind of what's going on and how hot the market's been and all the geopolitical stuff. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how it goes. But let's go take a look at the top insider trades. As you know, I like to look at a longer time period here for the insider return. So we'll start by looking at insider 6-month bullish only returns. Let's go take a look at the most recent filings we have available, starting with the purchases, and we will sort by transaction value. Taking a look first just at the tickers here to see if we see anything either unusual or if we're seeing some tickers that we're used to seeing. So Smithfield Foods is kind of an interesting one, which it's the top one, so let's just start with that one, which we saw a big sale and then a bunch of insiders coming in and buying during a public offering. So I'm not this sale down here, where are we? Down here for $522 million is obviously going to dwarf the amount of purchasing, which is about $42 million. But the sale, as far as we know, was not part of a public offering or anything. But then it looks like shares purchased through a directed share program in the issuer's public offering. So they had some sort of public offering going on that a bunch of insiders, participated in, which you like to see insiders participating in, obviously, but there's not nearly as much signal in that as if these were just kind of open market purchases, for some unknown reason. Looks like they were able to get the stock at $23.25, which is, about what it's trading at right now, so not an issue there. This one really, just based on the insider trading alone, I don't think there's much signal there. You could go see what was going on with this secondary offering here. Look into it and maybe see if the offering was for something, maybe more bullish, but generally speaking, just not a particularly high signal trade there. Mineralys Therapeutics here. For whatever reason, this guy and one other insider were able to get the stock at a way cheaper price. So they were able to get the price down here at $25.50. If we just go look at what the price is right now, $37. So, good work if you can get the stock $12 cheaper, but unfortunately we can't do that, so not useful for us. Now we've got a couple more interesting trades here. We got Saba Capital Management, who's been buying up ASA Gold for quite a while now, and they're up a ton on these purchases. This was a purchase that I actually personally copied as well, and I still am holding just, as some gold exposure there. So working out well for them so far, and they keep buying. They've also historically, the only other time they've really bought the stock was fantastic timing down here, when the stock was 50% lower. So, not the highest signal insider. They're a 10% owner. They make a ton of trades, Look, we've got 1,288 trades in the database, so hard to have much signal when they're trading that frequently, but it is interesting to note that they're buying gold here. Another very interesting one right here is the CEO at Cura, or however you pronounce this, Oncology. This one is interesting because two reasons. One, the CEO has now bought the stock twice. Once back here in August, right here on the chart, and then, just now. And if we click into just the CEO here, you can see never bought the stock before, or any stock before, where he's probably, I assume for some of these other companies, he's a director. So he's just on their board. But you can see he's never bought any stock before. He's the CEO here at Cura Oncology. Buys the stock back in August. It's already up about 20% since that purchase. But on top of that, they have a FDA ruling coming out that should come out either on or before November 30th, which obviously any biotech, any FDA ruling on biotech stuff for drug approval specifically, which is what this is, very, very notable, and obviously has the potential to either shoot the stock way up or crush the stock. So always a high risk, high reward play, but an insider buying the stock, with a pending catalyst being FDA approval by the end of November, I think is very bullish, very compelling, and especially if you play in the biotech space, I think you would definitely mark that down as on the bullish side of things for that FDA approval at the end of November. As just obviously, I don't know why an insider would be spending $700,000 if they, were not feeling good about an upcoming FDA approval. So I think that's a very interesting trade. Dollar Tree, a company that I believe has been on a bit of a tear here recently over the last year or so. Looks like it's cooled off now 17% in the last month, but is up 40% still in the last 6 months. It looks like another insider was selling as well. Normally when you have two insiders going against each other, it can make it kind of hard to decide who you should pay attention to. Let's just see if there's any note here about why that he bought in multiple purchases here. We've got he's the CFO buying. Let's click in and just see what his historic returns look like. Nailed the timing back here in the beginning of 2025, obviously. Looks like that's his only previous trade at all that he was up, very nearly bottom ticked it there, and was able to get 40% returns in the following 3 months, which is obviously quite good. That was a larger purchase, a much larger purchase, 1.2 million versus 340,000. Let's take a look at who was selling the stock as well. Looks like we're not going to have any history from them, as this will be their first ever sale. As we can see, never sold the stock before. Not much to go on here. I think this is probably a little too hard. Normally, 44% returns on the previous purchase is obviously a huge win, especially if we start to see somebody else get involved, right? If this guy down here decides to make a purchase as well, then it'd get very, very interesting. But we've got a purchase and a sell kind of canceling each other out a little bit there. Makes it hard to really grok what's going on there. And then, of course, just only one previous purchase before is not a ton of trade history. So, interesting, but I don't think it's the highest signal. Smithfield Foods, we already looked at some of those. We got Princeton Bank Corp here. This guy looks to be a very, very frequent buyer of the stock with some terribly timed purchases like the one up here or this one at the peak up here. But overall, decent timing on the buys there. Yeah, with quite good 1 year returns at least. Let's look historically. Not great back here. Probably a little hit or miss for me. I'm not sure if this is the highest signal. His timing's been a little weird, especially when you consider this is his largest purchase ever, it looks like, and he didn't time it very well. So this is another one. I just don't think that's quite interesting enough for me. There we've got Solaris Energy. We've got the CEO buying the stock, which is interesting. Looks like he bought it at almost this exact same price back in May, which is interesting. And again, back in March at a similar, maybe just a smidge lower price. So historically, he's only bought the stock back here some. Timing wise, these two down here in 2021 worked out very well as the stock doubled there. The next couple don't look like they quite were as well timed. The stock did spike there, from somewhere in the 9s, got up to 11, and then somewhere in the 10s, got up to about 12. So pretty good timing, which we can see just based on his historic win rates and all these returns, the buys that he's had. More recently, obviously now buying 3 times at this price, I think is also interesting. Let's go take a look to see if anybody else is buying. Historically, we've got a handful of sales actually, which obviously now the selling is going to muddies up this picture quite a bit, especially when you consider that whoever this was selling at the end of August also has a pretty good track record. The chief legal officer has timed their sales fairly well, timed the peak here, near the peak over here, near the peak over here. This is another one. I think energy is an interesting field to be in. If we saw some insider trading going on at some energy companies, we know Trump is very focused on energy. So that would be something to keep an eye out for, and something I am keeping an eye out is insider buying energy stocks or at like defense stocks or some of those things that Trump is interested in. This one I put a little bit in the too hard pile, kind of similar to the other one where there's just, you've got insider buying and selling. Makes it a little tricky there. Let's look at maybe one more purchase, see if there's anything interesting here. Down here, we've got the CFO at MDU Resources, which this is again another one that's kind of in a space that I'm interested in, this time in gas, but I kind of fit that into the for the sake of what Trump is interested in. I think gas is certainly in the same group, if you will, as energy. Also, this guy was also bought the stock just recently at 16.40, then bought it again a little lower in the 16s. Historically, decent timing, decent long-term timing at least back here. Well, this is actually the entire company. Let's look at just this guy's, who did buy a couple of times. The CFO bought a couple times back in 2020, it looks like. So obviously those worked out, except the one right before. Some unfortunate timing here as he bought right before COVID, which obviously I don't know if he would have known the COVID crash was coming quite yet at that point, but then he did buy twice while the stock was still pretty low during COVID, and then obviously those trades worked out. If we look over the longer term, at least 33% returns over the 1 year and 13% over the 6 months, 100% win rate over the year. So some good long-term signal here. So open market purchase in the energy/gas space, which I think is interesting, has now bought the stock twice, which is interesting. Also, the two largest purchases he has ever made. I think all of those kind of stack on top of each other too, especially if you're looking in the energy or the oil and gas space. I think MDU Resources is clearly one of the stocks that you should probably move to the top of your list of stocks to look into, as I think this is pretty compelling. Let's now go take a look at the sales here. So we're going to switch this to bearish. We're going to switch this to sale. So starting at the top here, it looks like Warburg Pincus selling some Sotera. I don't know if there's really much to write home about there. Stock is up 30% basically in the last 3 months. It looks like Warburg Pincus has actually timed their sales quite well at Sotera, historically speaking. I mean, every single one of these was at least at some point, the stock went down quite a bit afterwards. So I guess, with the stock going up, you've got a little bit of a sell the rip situation here with the stock in a pretty vertical straight line there over the last, really just like a month or so, not even, just over a month, I guess. So I actually think this is an interesting sale. If this is a stock that you own, might be worth looking into, whether you wanted to shed some of it or just avoid the stock overall, because I do think Warburg Pincus has a decent track record, at least with this stock, of timing their sales. And you've got another insider also selling the stock at the same time. They sold a total of 8 million shares in a secondary offering. So it is part of a secondary offering. A lot of times kind of hurts the stock a little bit, but it looks like they sold about the same time as Warburg Pincus did before. So part of a secondary offering. That's kind of up to you to probably take a look at what the secondary offering was for, why they decided to sell some of the stock or have a secondary offering. Two insiders that have a pretty good track record of selling the stock before it goes down, I think, is definitely notable. Here we've got a director, it looks like, at Encino, looking at his historic sales. Not the best timing back here in 2024. Good timing here, not as good timing here, good timing here. I think this guy, the win rate just a little too low, below 50%. It is a massive sale. $117 million is pretty huge. 93% of listed holdings is obviously pretty huge. Let's go take a look at if there's any other insider also selling the stock at the same time. The SVP of accounting, see if their sale timing hasn't really been any better. A very big sale, but I don't think it has particularly high signal just based on the timing of the previous sales from this insider. Let's actually just look at one more thing. We can see the size of this sale, 117. So it looks like he's made bigger sales before, 159. And an easier way to do this will be look here. So we made a bigger sale here, 193 in the middle of 2024, 179 in early 2024, 159 in late 2024. Decently timed sale, not as good of a timed sale. Yeah, I think it's probably his third or fourth-ish biggest sale ever, which makes it, somewhat notable, but not really a great track record of timing sales. So I don't know, consider that too high signal. Looks like Warburg Pincus is also selling another stock that's up quite a bit over the last 6 months. They're up 30%. Selling Banc of California. No previous previous track record of selling this stock. You could look at this a couple ways, I think, which is just one, Warburg Pincus does have a good track record of making sales, at least at Sotera Health. So does that then mean maybe this sale at Banc of California is also potentially a higher signal? Or you could look at the other way and just say, well, it looks like maybe Warburg Pincus is trying to raise some money. So they're selling off a handful of their holdings. So probably could go back and forth. You could probably put that in the too hard pile, but I don't think they're the highest signal out of all time. The CEO at Arista Networks has now been selling for quite a while. Stock has totally shrugged it off, but you can see didn't sell the stock basically all through the first half of 2025. I was selling in much smaller portions at the beginning of 2024. Then it looks like they probably ended their 10b5-1 plan somewhere in summer of 2024, or at least really slowed it down. But then massively increased the size of sales here in the last 2 months or so, about 2 months. But they crushed earnings still. The stock went up quite a bit. So hard to know how much signal this insider really has, or whether or not they're just selling stock on a 10b5-1 plan to take out some money for whatever reason. It is notable though, like these sales are just huge. A $243 million sale by one insider, that's like, probably 20x the size of our average sales before. Just historically speaking, that has certainly been notable. Insiders on 10b5-1 plans that suddenly make huge sales on 10b5-1 plans typically signal outperformance over the next 3 to 12 months, or underperformance over the next 3 to 12 months. So this is one of those ones where there's so many companies that are kind of playing the same theme as Arista Networks, where you could probably find a better company in the same theme that doesn't have big insider selling that you could feel a little more confident in. Is probably how I would approach this one. I don't think this is a huge signal by itself. I certainly don't expect that stock to just crash anytime soon, but I do think maybe it could underperform relative to some of its competitors that maybe don't have any of the insider selling. Areas management we've been seeing selling at for a little while by this exec chairman, which, you would say if you didn't look back historically, you'd be like, wow, bulk selling here, a bunch of sells in a row is definitely notable. The stock, has just been trickling down over the last month. However, when you go back a little further, you can see that he made an even larger sale back here in early 2024, also bulk selling at the same time, and the stock then, cruised up another 50%. Afterwards. So probably got to mark this guy down as not a very high signal and just move on. Another unscheduled 20% sale here by 10% owner. Quickly looking through the timing, just doesn't seem particularly good. Gonna quickly move on from that one. 10b5-1 sale. Axon Enterprises, we know this is the CEO. Been a semi-popular stock pitch because of, a little bit of it exposure to the defense industry. So ever since Trump took over, it's been a little bit of a popular pitch, and the stock has, you can see right after elections, the stock went way up, and the stock has gone up quite a bit over the last 6 months as well. Selling here, but I don't think, it's a 10b5-1 sale scheduled ahead of time. This insider doesn't seem to have, a great track record of timing sales, so I don't think there's anything too crazy to look at there. Autodesk, another popular stock. We've got the COO now selling the stock up near the top. Not a great track record of selling. Maybe let's see how much he sold. 7 million, so we can quickly check to see if anybody else sold. Only looks like there's been another, not even $1 million sold by other insiders, so not a ton of insider selling. Not something I'd take a look at. Palantir 10b5-1 plan, lots of insiders on 10b5-1 plans there. Now the exec chairman at D.R. Horton is interesting because this is like a builder supplier type company, I believe, which has been, the Trump administration has mentioned some stuff about the housing market and maybe needing to get involved in some way there to make housing more affordable. So we've actually seen quite a bit of buying. Resideo Technologies would be a big one that we've seen. A decent amount of buying at some of these companies. Builders First Source, we also saw some buying at, which has been on a tear. So it's interesting to now see some selling at a company in a similar industry. The exec chairman, historically speaking, looks like they made probably 2 purchases, a couple sales in the past. Timing wise, they nailed this one in 2021. Stock way down over the next 6 months. This one there in March of 2024, not quite as good of timing as the stock, went on a little bit of a tear there through the back half. So I wouldn't call this guy the highest signal insider trader, at least by himself, but we can take a look. And now we're seeing a couple other insiders also sold this stock. So it makes it a little more interesting, and we can take a look at the overall. Now we've got all the buys and sells for the company here. here on a chart. Historically, lots of buying and selling. Don't know if there's much that we can really glean from that. Similarly, if we look at just the last 2 years, I'm not sure there's much we can buy or much we can glean from the insiders making sales here. It is notable maybe that this is a $6 million of selling in this recent period here, which is more than we've seen at least over the last couple of years. So a little bit of an increase in selling, not the best track record from all of these guys, but interesting that it's in the housing market where we have also seen buying. So that's one of those ones where if the housing market is a sector that you want to play in, or type of stocks you want to play in, you could start to take a look at some of the stocks that have insider buying versus some of the stocks that have had insider selling, and that could maybe help you dictate which stocks you decide to add to your portfolio. Is kind of how I like to play those. Just gives you another signal. If insiders are seeming to be bullish on the company, why not maybe put those up a little higher than some of the companies where the insiders aren't bullish. St. Joe Company, another pretty popular stock pitch, which you can always, as always, you can go to joinyellowbrick.com if you want to see what people are saying about certain stocks. And so we've seen like Praetorian Capital is a hedge fund that's been pitching St. Joe Company for quite a while. River Road Capital owns St. Joe Company as well. So you can see what the bull case is. They basically own a bunch of land in Florida that people think is undervalued. But on the insider side of things, if we click in here, we have now been seeing a decent chunk of selling recently. So you can see all this selling here after the stock's only up 6% in the last 11 months. So that's not enough for insiders to really be selling. Historically speaking, they seem to time their sales okay. Decent short-term timing up here, decent or really good timing up here, really good timing here, pretty good timing here. So insiders getting out, it looks like it's really just this guy though. So let's go look at this guy's selling by himself and see how he timed it historically. It looks like, just according to the return calculations, it looks like they're going to be all right. And they do kind of match up with what we saw before. Pretty bad selling here, okay short-term here, and then much better here. As far as returns go, I don't think this guy's the highest signal. I wouldn't be too scared off by this selling, though. Why the director is deciding to turn on some sales right now, I would be interested in. Let's see if the footnote tells us anything. It does not. Not much signal there in my opinion. And lastly, let's take a look at one more here. Let's take a look at a therapeutics company, Tango Therapeutics. Third Rock Venture buying some of the stock here. They've or selling some of the stock, excuse me. They've now sold the stock 3 times in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Certainly notable. The insider returns look good. So let's go take a look at just their insider returns. They're telling us they average 40% 3 month, 50% 6 months. So that's definitely notable. Let's take a look at when they sold these stocks. So this is where it gets kind of hard when you're judging a company by like a win rate, where all of these count as separate sales, but I would almost consider this as just like one timing of a trade. But however, you'll notice tons of selling, and the stock did go down quite a bit over the next year, especially. Also, this one-off sale back here for $1.95 million, they nailed the timing there as well. Again, we're in the biotech space, so always a very rocky, volatile space. Lots of money to be made or lost being on the right or wrong side of these moves. Up 250% in the last 6 months. They're starting to sell. It's their biggest selling since, this combined period had more selling, 23.5 million. But these sales are their biggest individual sales by quite a bit. You've got a $7 million sale, which is, before the $7 million sale, the largest sale ever was $5.39 million. But now you've got a $7 million, a $5 million, and a $2 million all happening in this one period. And they might continue selling. We saw them sell, I don't know how many sales this was, 11 in this quarter it looks like. So they're only at 3 right now. We might continue to see them sell after this 266% run up. So I think that's definitely notable. Multiple, selling the stock multiple times, a good track record of selling the stock, a very good track record of selling the stock, in a very volatile space. So I would probably go take a look here and just see, do they have any sort of catalyst that could be positive or negative coming up? Any sort of FDA approvals, any phase or trial readouts or trial updates of any sort? That'd be the next step here to go see. And if they do coming up in the near future, this would certainly lean me more towards the bearish side of the outcome for whatever that catalyst may be. So I think that's a good place to stop for today. You can go find all the insider trades at CEOWatcher.com, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.